We're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapters 4 and 5 tonight. Hopefully everybody's read some of this, because like I told you last week, when we've got two chapters, it's just nearly impossible to try to read very much, if any, out of it. So, not a story that you've probably never heard before, at least, so maybe you can remind us a little bit and bring up some info in our minds. Question number 1 on your handout is, why would a person or group seek to transfer a difficult responsibility to somebody else? Fear? Okay. That kind of goes along with our lesson tonight, doesn't it? I can remember everybody, when you went through school, did you ever have a group assignment? You always have, every group always has that one person who says, I'm not going to do anything. You know, if you guys want a good grade, you're going to have to do it all. Anybody ever experience anything like that? So what would make a person act like that? Lazy. That's the first thing that comes to my mind, you know. Lazy, irresponsible, just don't want to do anything. So that could make somebody transfer a difficult responsibility to somebody else. Now the other one that I had down there is the one that Steve brought up, and that is fear or the consequences being too great if you don't succeed. And sometimes, you know, a person is given an assignment and that's just too much on them, then they'll pass that on to somebody else. Now, I bring that up because as we go through our lesson tonight, we're going to read about the Philistines, who basically, remember they end up in the story capturing the ark. Then they don't really want the ark, so they kind of pass it around to everybody else. So we'll talk a little bit more, Lord willing, as we get into the story tonight. All right, starting in chapter 4 here, we read about a war that takes place between Israel and the Philistines. And the Israelites go out to battle the Philistines. In their first attack or battle, they're defeated. And how many people do they lose? 4,000 people die. Right? 4,000 soldiers, Israelite soldiers, are killed. And that caused the elders of Israel to stop and to think and to ponder. And what question did they ask?
Should they go get the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah. Well, what really was the first thing that they asked, though?
Why has the Lord defeated us today?
Yeah. Why? You know, why did 4,000 of us die in this battle today? And what would be the answer to that question?
Well, this is the time.
Yeah, we're still on the tail end here of the Judges, aren't we? We're still with Eli here, who when he ends up dying, I think it says, what was he, judged him 40 years, is that right? Somewhere in that area, I don't remember the exact number, but he was a judge of Israel. And generally during the times of the Judges, Israel was not very faithful, right? What did God promise them whenever they entered into the promised land about their enemies? As long as they obeyed God, he said, I'll fight your battles for you. You know, you don't have to worry about anybody. You know, I'll put the fear of God into all these enemies that you're fighting, and you're going to be victorious and successful. So once again, you have to stop and kind of examine the overall evidence and say, well, why is it the case that 4,000 of the Israelites here die in this battle? And of course, the answer is because they're not doing what God told them to do. Not obeying him, not following his commandments. They have a little bit different idea or view, though, than that, right? What did they deduce was wrong, or the why as to they were defeated?
They didn't have God in the box with them.
Okay, so basically, if you see when they're talking about the idea of the ark here, I think it's back in verse 3. They ask the question, why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hand of our enemies. And so they thought, or they believed, well, we don't have the ark, that's why we're not winning these battles. Now, why would they think that? Can you think of any historical events, any events in the past that might lead them to think this way?
Well, the ark went before
Okay, so Jericho is one of those battles that stands out. You know, they had the Ark of the Covenant along with them. They fought this battle, they won, right? And generally speaking, like Adam said, whenever they entered into the Promised Land, the Ark went along with them, didn't it? They fought all these battles and they won these battles. And so in their mind, they're thinking back and they're trying to figure out, well, what could we do or why would this be happening? And they say, oh, it's because we didn't bring the Ark along with us. And so how would you say they viewed the Ark of the Covenant?
Like a weapon.
Okay, like a weapon. Anything else? Okay, they believed that it belonged to them, right? What else?
It instilled confidence.
Yeah, I think when they thought about the Ark of the Covenant, they viewed it more like an idol, wouldn't you think? I mean, they viewed it as being a god. Just like they were prone to idolatry, they were worshiping all these other idols, but to them, that was God. And so if they brought God into the battle with them, then they could be sure that God was on their side and they were going to win. So in their minds, it had the ability or the power to save them. Now I want you to just think about that principle or that idea. Can you think of any way that could apply to us today? Now, we probably all say, well, we won't worship idols, right? We don't view God as being in a physical box like maybe the Israelites did.
Some people view crosses that way.
Okay, a lot of religions today are big on symbols, aren't they? Things that represent things that they think may have power in and of themselves. You know, I was kind of thinking of it more from the standpoint, Israel's out here and they're definitely not doing what God commanded them to do, but yet they think that if they bring the Ark of the Covenant into this battle, they can secure the favor of God. And, you know, sometimes as Christians, I think there's things that we could look at in the Scripture, and just two things that I thought of, and it could be any number of things, but what about water baptism? Right, a person says, well, I've been baptized, I'm all right. You know, God's on my side. Well, is that true?
Depends on whether we're faithful.
Yeah. Are we obeying God? You know, it's more than just about water baptism. That's part of it, is. But just because we've done one thing that God told us to do doesn't mean that we're living faithfully. Yes, sir.
Another form of idolatry that I think of is there are a lot of people that they'll hold up a Bible and they believe that there's all this power in the Bible, but they don't really believe what's in it. It's that this is a holy book, and they use the term or use the Bible sometimes to increase their own power or to make a point or credibility, kind of like getting on stand, putting your hand on the Bible. To an extent, that, you know, if you believe what's in it, then that's okay. But if you don't, then you're treating it like it's an idol because somehow the book has power. But without faith, it's pages and leather.
Yeah, and that's another good parallel, I think, between our day and their day. Another one that I wrote down or thought about was church attendance. You know, is it important for us to assemble with the saints? Does that mean if we come here every time the doors are open that God's on our side?
No.
We got to do a lot more than that, don't we? We got to live morally. You know, there's a lot of other things that God has told us to do. And so this idea, you know, that we can somehow confine God and put him in a place where we make him be on our side is kind of the mindset that Israel had. And of course, we have that same mindset, I think, from time to time too. So anyway, they decide they need the ark. They bring the ark into the camp. And how do the Israelites react to the ark, the coming of the ark?
Great joy.
Yeah, great joy. And the Bible says, I think maybe it's the King James Version, says the earth rained. Some other version says the ground shook. But it's literally this idea, you know, they start getting excited, they started shouting, and it was so loud that the sound filled the entire area. Now that's a metaphor, but the idea, it kind of gives you a picture of just how loud it was. It was so loud that the Philistines heard it, right? And said, what in the world's going on in the camp of Israel? You know, all this noise, what does it mean? And of course, they get word, I'd imagine through spies, that the Israelites had brought the Ark of the Covenant into the camp. And so question number 3 here, what kind of reaction did that provoke among the Philistines? Talked about what it did to the Israelites. What did it do to the Philistines?
Made them afraid.
Yeah, fear and panic. If you read about their reaction. And what's interesting to me about this story is why were they so afraid? What caused them to be so afraid and panic?
They knew the stories
Yeah, specifically which ones?
about the Egyptians.
Yeah, they mentioned, these are the gods that brought up the Israelites out of the land of Egypt. And so they were familiar, at least to some degree, with the knowledge and the history of how God had delivered them, the Israelites, out of the hand of Pharaoh and out of the land of Egypt. And so that caused them to be afraid and caused them to panic a little bit. But you think about how the Israelites viewed the ark. How did the Philistines view the ark?
They said, God is coming to the camp.
Yeah, basically they both thought of it in the same way, wouldn't you say? And again, I think that's kind of reflects upon the mindset of idolatry that Israel was in at this current period of time. So the Philistine commanders decide they need to do something. They got to motivate their troops here. So question number 4, what do they do to motivate their troops? How do you motivate somebody who's afraid and panicking? Okay. They put the challenge before them. They said, you guys got to fight even harder now. If you don't fight as hard as you can, then you're going to end up being slaves to the Israelites like they've been slaves to us. And so they gave them something, I guess, that to be a little bit more afraid of than maybe just death itself. But they spoke to their soldiers. They roused their emotions, and they stirred them up to go out there and to fight for their lives, and to fight probably like they'd never fought before. So you read about when the Ark of the Covenant comes into the camp, what 2 people come along with it?
Eli's 2 sons.
Yeah, Eli's 2 sons. Remember we studied about them last week. The useless, worthless, no good for nothing fellas. Phinehas and Eleazar. Is that right? Hophni. Man, I get them mixed up. Hophni and Phinehas. There we go. I knew that didn't sound right. So they come along with the ark. And can you imagine? Here's 2 of probably the most wicked people living within your society, within your nation. And they're your religious leaders. I mean, they're the guys who you're counting on to help you win this war and get God on your side. So again, it kind of displays just how warped their mind and their thinking was at this particular time. So we read about the losses. Question number 5 here. The losses in the battle. Before the ark came, how many we say died in the first battle?
4,000.
Okay, and how many died after the ark was brought into the battlefield?
30,000.
30,000. So did it have the effect that Israel wanted it to have? Or they thought it would have? Absolutely not. In fact, it had the opposite effect. We read how the Philistines, initially their reaction is that of fear and terror, but really the bringing of that ark motivated them to put forth their best possible effort in fighting these Israelites. And so kind of raised, I guess, their war, their fierceness to another level. Now, we know ultimately that's not why the war or the battle was lost, but it is interesting to notice that it had exactly the opposite effect that they were hoping for it to have. So 30,000 die in that battle. And question number 6 here, what happens to the ark? Yeah, it became spoiled, didn't it? The Philistines captured the ark, took it back to their place. We'll talk a little bit about what they did with it here in a little while. What happened to the two priests?
Slain.
Hophni and Phinehas were killed in this battle. And why is that significant? Do you remember what we studied last week?
It was prophesied.
Yeah. God told Samuel to tell Eli that he was going to remove the priesthood from his house, his family, his descendants, and the sign of that would be the death of his two sons in the very same day. And so, this is one of those things where when God says something, it's going to come true. And that was the sign that the priesthood was removed from Eli and from his descendants and his family. So the ark was taken, Hophni and Phinehas are killed, and Eli, what's Eli's physical condition at this point?
Bad eyes.
Okay, one thing we know is he can't see, right? His eyes are dim, and we didn't read it last week because, well, we didn't read anything last week, but in chapter 3, you remember whenever Samuel hears the voice of God calling, one of the things it mentions is Eli's old and he can't see very well. But part of his physical condition was his eyesight was about gone. What else did we learn about him? He's old. Yeah, he's getting well up there in age now.
Didn't it say somewhere he was overweight?
Yeah, and so we read about, how do you think he got so big? Remember what his sons were doing with the sacrifices and the offerings? They were taking anything and everything that they wanted. And I imagine Eli was benefiting from that too. But it is kind of an interesting idea and report. He's probably in pretty poor physical health here because he's not at the tabernacle. He's not out here, doing what a high priest would normally do at this point. But anyway, he's waiting, can't see, he's waiting for a report as to what's happening in this war. And finally, a messenger comes back to him, gives him a report. What do they tell him?
His 2 sons are dead.
Yeah, his 2 sons are dead. Now that, I don't know about you, but if somebody came and told me that 2 of my children were dead, that would be a pretty big shock, wouldn't it? What else did they tell him?
The ark was gone.
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant had been captured. And I want you to think about that because this up to this point in the history of Israel and the Ark of the Covenant, this is uncharted territory. This is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened to the Ark before. Remember, the Ark is always where? It's in the tabernacle. In what part?
Holy of holies.
Holy of Holies. And everybody just walks in there and looks at it all the time, right? No, only the high priest went in there, remember?
Once a year. Right?
Yeah, and just once a year. And so it's normally covered up. It's normally hidden behind the veil. Whenever they were commanded to move it, what were they also commanded to do to the Ark of the Covenant? Do you remember? Yeah, there was a certain way that they had to carry it, but they were also supposed to take the veil of that temple and wrap it around the Ark of the Covenant and cover it up. And even when it was moved, it wasn't like people could just walk up and look at it, or even touch it or mess with it. It's always in this place where it's basically hidden, covered, remaining out of sight, and basically being protected. So it's hard to imagine, how you would react to something like that. And Eli, knowing the significance of the ark, knowing the history of it, knowing the part that it played in worshiping God, is a pretty important part in having your sins forgiven, wasn't it? Would you agree with that? Yeah, that's what the high priest did. That's where he put the blood. That's where, where he went in to have the sins of the people rolled forward. That's where he had to go. That's the instrument that he interacted with. And so think about all those things coming into the mind of Eli as he hears that this ark has been taken. And so, question, trying to see here, number 7. Of all the bad news, what do you think was the worst to Eli? What pushed him over the edge? It was the ark. Now think about that again. 2 of your sons have just died. But the most devastating news, the one that caused him to lose his life, was that the Ark of the Covenant had been captured. That's hard to imagine, isn't it? But it shows you a little bit about what I think it meant to Israel and how they thought of it in that day and age. We read about another family member that dies because of hearing the bad news. Who's that? Question number 8 here.
Phineas' wife.
Yeah, Phineas' wife, Eli's daughter-in-law, when she hears about the death of her husband, the capturing of the ark, makes her go into labor and had some complications in that, and she ends up dying. And what does she name her son? You know, the women tried to offer some words of comfort. You know, they probably knew how dire the situation was, but they were trying to say something positive and helpful to her, and they told her, you know, you've born a man-child. And think about what that meant to a Jewish woman in that day and age. I mean, that was significant, wasn't it? But she names him what? Ichabod. And why does she name him Ichabod?
The glory is departed from Israel, the ark is gone.
Yeah, literally no glory. That's what it means. And so she understood the implications of the ark being captured too, and you know what that meant for her people. So it was again, to us, we read about it and we think, no big deal. And part of the reason I think we think that because we know, well, it comes back. But they didn't know that then and there. And to lose that piece of worship, it puts your nation and puts you as an individual in a very difficult situation. So chapter 5, that's basically chapter 4. Anybody having, yes sir?
Do you think that she was aware of the prophecy you mentioned that when both Eli's sons died in the same day, that it would be removed, that the priesthood would be removed from their house?
Yeah, it's hard to say, I think. You know,
I only wonder that because a man-child is a big deal, and if God just took the priesthood from the family, then what does it really matter whether it was a boy or girl or not? Their family line is essentially ruined anyways.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know for sure, and I just kind of thinking off the top of my head here. You know, the only, I don't think there's any indication that anybody else is told about this, right? Samuel tells Eli, and if I were Eli, I wouldn't go out. I wouldn't be walking around talking to everybody about it. You know, I'd be pretty ashamed of it. But I don't know. She may have known, she may not have. But like you said, it is kind of interesting that she has no joy or reaction in the fact that she's just born a male child into the world. So they decide to take it back to their place, right? The Philistines capture the ark. Where do they decide they're going to take it? Yeah, why would they do something like that? Yeah, Dagon was one of their many gods. You know, this was, again, you read about these different nations surrounding Israel. They weren't, generally speaking, they weren't monotheists. They didn't just have one God. They were polytheists. They had many different gods that they worshiped. And this was one of their gods. I think, well, it's been a while since I studied it, but I think they believed that this was the father of Baal. So it tells you a little bit about maybe where in their rankings they would have ranked or thought about this god. So they decide they're going to put it in the house of their god. And why would they do something like that? What's the significance of that?
We're trying to show my God's more powerful than your God. Look what we did, we conquered you.
Yeah, it was basically a relic that whenever people would come into the house of Dagon, it would remind them how powerful their God was. this God is greater than the God of Israel. Remember this battle? Remember what happened here? See the evidence of it? So that was pretty common in that day and age to do that. If you won a great war, when David fought Goliath, you remember what David did with the armor?
Well, the sword was in the tabernacle because he went and retrieved it when he was on the run from Saul.
Yes.
I don't know about the armor, but
I think he kept the armor for himself. I think he put it in his tent. But the sword was kept in the tabernacle as a relic, a reminder. So it was pretty common practice in that day and age for something like this to happen. So they decide that's what they're going to do. And question number 9 here, the first morning after they place the ark in the house of Dagon, what happens?
They find Dagon fallen on his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord.
Yeah, so can you imagine this? I mean, I would think, and I don't know how big this statue, this idol was, but I'd think if this was the God that you worship, I'd have him fastened down pretty good, wouldn't you? I wouldn't want anything happening to it. And so here you are, you get up early in the morning, you walk in, and here's your God. I don't know that he's ever fallen before, So that would be strange in and of itself. But the fact that he was fallen down, like face first, bowing to the Ark of the Covenant, somebody had to say, well, maybe that's a weird coincidence, right? First day. So what do?
stand him back up.
You just pick him back up, put him back into place, right? One time, no big deal, not that big a concern. Well, the second morning they get up and what's happened?
Down again.
Yeah, down again, but what's different than from the first day?
The only thing left is just his trunk.
All he's got is a torso, right? His head is cut off or broken off. His hands are separated from his torso. And he's in the very same position that he was before. And so, what do you think they thought at this time? Yeah, happens 2 days in a row, not a coincidence, right? And so they immediately start to think something's going on here. Now, kind of interesting when you read that story, the Bible offers us some additional information. It says that nobody steps on that threshold to the day that was written. And so that's kind of interesting to me. And people are a little bit conflicted in the meaning of that. But I think what it's saying is they viewed that spot as something happened here. You don't step on that spot. Our God fell down 2 times right there. When you come in, you step over that spot. You don't want to put your foot in it. And that was kind of their custom from that day on. But they knew something was going on here. So question number 10, besides the damage to Dagon, what else happened in Ashdod?
The people of the city started getting sick.
Yeah, so there's some plagues, and it's kind of interesting because we don't read about, all the details of it. But if you flip over to chapter 6 real quick, this is, it's interesting to me in verse 4. Remember when they're sending the ark back, they put some things to go along with it. And this kind of represents what went on at this particular time. There were 5 golden tumors. That's what we read about there in chapter 5. That's the New King James Version. 5 golden tumors and 5 golden rats. Would you ever read about any rats? Why do you think they put rats in there?
Plagues.
They thought that's how they got the tumors.
Okay, evidently that probably is the way that this disease was spread. And a lot of people think of it like a bubonic plague. That was pretty common in that day and age for rodents and things of that nature to carry disease. And so it's kind of indicating to us that these rats were a part of what they believed went on. So can you imagine, you bring this relic into your city and all of a sudden your city is overrun with rats. And then you're having this disease that's being spread all over along with it. And so the people got more and more concerned, and eventually they decide they're going to have to do something to it. Now, before we talk about what they did. I want you to notice question 11 here. What do the Philistines conclude about the power of God, of the God of Israel over their God Dagon? What do they say there in chapter 5 and verse 7?
Says the ark of God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is harsh towards us, and Dagon our God.
Okay, they said the hand of God is upon us, but the hand of God is upon Dagon, our God. And the first day, he was laying face first down. The second day, he was falling down, his head and his hands were cut off. So basically, they were saying, what are we going to do if we keep this? What's going to happen to him if we keep this ark here? You know, the hand of God is against him too. So it's interesting that they readily acknowledged that the God of Israel was doing this and was more powerful than their God. But it didn't cause them to change anything. They just kept on worshiping him anyway. So question number 12, what was the general consensus as to what should be done to kind of reduce the panic there in Ashdod?
Send it to another city.
Yeah, give it to somebody else.
Yeah, everybody said, we got to get this out of here. You know, people are going crazy. And I don't know, you know, how far, you probably heard rumors that people were talking about, well, we believe this is the act of the God of Israel, you know, retribution. And so you move it to a different city, and what happens there?
Happens again.
Yeah, they move it to Gath, the very same thing happens. Now, again, it happens in one city, you move the ark, same thing happens in another city. I think everybody's knowing about it now, don't you? And so they left it there for a while, and then they said, we got to get it out of here, and said, so we're going to move it to Ekron. That's one of the Philistines had 5 major capitals or 5 major cities that within their empire, and these were 3 of them. Basically, they were moving it from a very populated place to another very populated place. And how did the people of Ekron react when the ark comes into their city?
We don't want it.
Yeah. They said, well, are these guys trying to kill us or what? You know, why would they bring the ark into our city? And I don't know in the beginning, you know, if you were to go around to these 5 major cities and to say, which one of you guys wants the Ark of the Covenant in your city, who do you think would have taken it?
All of them before the promise.
Before anything happened, I think anybody would have been ecstatic, you know, to have this relic of war within their city. But now, nobody wants anything to do with it. And so, besides all this suffering, of course, that's caused by the diseases that come along, you also have what effect on the Philistines here? Question 13. Wasn't just physical things that they had to go through, right? What's their emotional state? They're scared to death, aren't they? Scared to death, they're going to die. And they're panicked about all these things that are going on. So we're going to stop there because we're out of time. Lord willing, next week we'll talk about what happened to the Ark of God. And an interesting, I didn't have time to look at it tonight, but there is an interesting backstory, I guess you could say, that revolves around Shiloh. Remember that Shiloh is the first place where basically the tabernacle is set up as kind of a permanent place for its operation. You can read in the book of Psalms, you can read Jeremiah chapter 7, forget which psalm it is, but you can read in the book of Psalms, Shiloh was destroyed at one time or another. And it's pretty evident from the rest of the Bible that this is the time and place that it was destroyed. Again, you can read about the destruction of it there, but because when the ark comes back, why didn't they just take it back to Shiloh and set it back in the tabernacle? Well, if tabernacle's not there, you're probably not going to take it back to Shiloh and set it up there. So we'll study a little bit more about that and read a little bit more about it, Lord willing, next week. Anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions before we end?
I just got to ask, is hemorrhoids a word for tumors?
Well, some people think it should be translated hemorrhoids, which is, again, the root meaning, some of the root meanings of these words, it's hard to decipher exactly what was going on. So some people think that's a possibility.
The door just shows up in verse 9 and again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Or maybe
Most versions translated as tumors, so.
Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, part of it was, but that could have been some other disease too that was spread by the rats too. But I think there was more than one thing that was going on. I think there are a lot of different things that were going on that caused that, again, that panic and fear to set in. So.
Well, didn't the plague, the bubonic plague, it was carried by the mice, the rats, and fleas actually on, wasn't it? And didn't it make the lymph nodes swell?
Yeah.
And feel like tumors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And that's what most people believe. Again, that swelling, that lymph nodes referencing the idea of a tumor. So. Anybody else?
Something I thought about is what was God thinking through all this was going on, with his life. He was very sad about that, but then laughing at what was going on with the Philistines.
Yeah, well, we know, and this is one of those stories where it's evidence God revealed himself to all of mankind. He made himself known to these different nations, not just Israel. So